That was Senator Rand Paul in a teaser video ahead of his presidential campaign announcement today. So can the Kentucky senator set himself apart from the growing GOP field?
To discuss, Richard Socarides, former senior advisor to President Clinton and a Democratic strategist, and Sherry Jacobus, Republican strategist and president of Capital Strategies PR. It's hard to argue with what Rand Paul just said there, isn't it? I mean, it is certainly time for a new president. President Obama can't run again. It's all about the labels. People will say, no, I'm not labels, I'm beyond labels. But what labels do you put on Rand Paul?
I think he's going to be very interesting and bring something new and fresh to the campaign. That's not an endorsement. I haven't picked a candidate. I like things in all of them. Look, everybody's watching him. Everybody's curious about him. He's now moved to the more traditional Republican pro-defense stance by saying that he would like increased defense spending. That's a good thing. That makes him attractive to the establishment types and people who might have been nervous thinking he's too much of a libertarian. But he still has strong libertarian ties. And I think the reason Republicans like him or could like him is he can't, I don't think he's going to be the nominee, but he can bring in a lot of independents and libertarians into the Republican fold, which is very valuable. So he's interesting to watch. We're all talking about him. He's getting a lot of attention. I think it's a good thing. It's a net gain for him, certainly, that he is standing out from the others.
He is an interesting guy. He's a doctor. He's an ophthalmologist. He has a decidedly different views than some of the Republican pack. But what is the path forward for him, Richard?
I don't really think there is a path. I mean, I think being new, we certainly know he used new about 8 times in that little snippet, and being interesting, which he certainly is interesting. I mean, interesting, interesting means a lot. But I think the trouble for him will be finding a ideological sweet spot within the Republican primary voter group that works for him. And I think he's a bit of an isolationist. He's a libertarian. Many of the social conservatives don't think he's conservative enough.
He should get some more juice. You're not giving him enough juice, Socarides. Look at the polls. Let's put up some of these polls we have here, Dupes. He's high up on every poll that you have, whether it's how he is within the field. He's third behind Bush and Walker, which, those guys, big sitting governors, big families, big recognition, and he's there. Against Clinton, he's at the top of the list right now.
Well, listen, I definitely think, I know why you're saying that, because he's announcing today, and he is definitely going to be in the top tier of Republican candidates, but I do not think ultimately that he has a path to capture the nomination, because I think he's he's a bit of a loner.
And Sharon, we've seen this with his father. I mean, Ron Paul has passionate supporters. I mean, oh my gosh, the emails that I would get when Ron Paul was running, and yet he couldn't win the nomination.
But see, this is not, he's not his father. He gets some of that good stuff from his dad and from the name and from his own libertarian. He's like libertarian with a small L. So he's still palatable to a lot of mainstream Republicans, slightly left of center, centrist Democrats. And he's also going to have a big impact, I think, on the early debates on the issues that Republicans will focus on. He will make sure that the issues of fiscal accountability, fiscal responsibility are front and center. And he does have a constituency that will follow him. So if he doesn't make it, he could be put on the ticket as a vice presidential nominee for a lot of those guys that are out there running. So he's very interesting. He's very valuable. He brings a lot to the table. Don't just count him.
Let me tell you, the people, the folks I talked to in the Hillary Clinton camp would love to run against Rand Paul, because
more than any of these other guys?
Well, I mean, I think they would all provide interesting challengers, and some of them more than others. But I mean, Rand Paul is out of the mainstream of American political thought. He does have some very interesting ideas. They appeal to blocks of people. But, he would be someone the Democrats would like to run against.
Well, he's doubled back on a couple of things to make himself more palatable to Republicans about funding of defense and what you do with foreign aid, especially where Israel's involved. But when you look at the rest of the field, I mean, he had some nice distinguishing characteristics. One of the lamentations of politics is you have to swallow your passion once you want to be acceptable to other people. But when you look at a Rubio or a Walker or a Cruz versus Paul, how do you think he stacks up?
They're all relatively new, I think, to the general public. So
I left Bush out for a reason, by the way.
Right.
But what do you think about these other guys?
I think they're all interesting and new and fresh, and it presents they all have an opportunity because of that, as they increase their name ID, as this goes mainstream. So when you look at their so-called changes that some of them have made, or that Paul has made in his stances, the truth is most people aren't paying attention, and they're not going to start paying attention until about now or very soon. So they're not really familiar with the past. And also with regard to Rand Paul's change in defense, with regard to increased military defense spending, that is a reflection, maybe not so much of what he needs to do to be more acceptable to mainstream Republicans in a Republican primary, but it reflects the changing world and what our country's position in this world, and what, frankly, what President Obama has done to our nation's standing, our security. So that is something that makes sense to sort of change with the times as the new threats arise.
Let's talk about Jeb Bush for a second. It came out that in 2009, he checked a box on a voter form for identifying himself as Hispanic. Now, his wife is Hispanic, his children are half Hispanic, but he himself is not Hispanic.
He isn't?
He's not. And he, in fact...
Are you sure?
I'm sure because...
Was he sure?
Well,
Was he sure, or is he uncertain?
Here's what he said on Twitter. Here's what he said on Twitter. Let me put that up for you. This was his tweet. He says, "My mistake. Don't think I fooled anyone." And he's retweeting his son's tweet that said, "Come on, Dad, LOL, come on, Dad. Think you checked the wrong box."
I mean, maybe he would like to be Hispanic, because the Republicans cannot win the presidency unless they appeal to Hispanic voters, and
well, he appeals to them.
And
that's
that
for
is
sure.
why.
She has a
That
Hispanic
is
family.
why he and Marco Rubio, I think, are the most challenging Republican candidates. I mean, as a Democrat, I think the toughest candidates for us to face would be Bush or Rubio, because they have a history of appealing to Hispanic voters.
You
But
agree?
this is not a big deal. This problem of checking the wrong box, that's not a big deal.
It's not a big deal, and if
Well, it's not a big
Democrats,
deal if honesty is not
if
a big deal.
Democrats, if
come on,
Democrats make it was clearly a mistake. Nobody's going to believe that he's Hispanic. If Democrats make a big deal about it, they look foolish. And frankly, if his Republican primary opponents or their surrogates make a big deal about it, they look foolish. What this does is this whole discussion serves to remind people that, as you said, he has a Hispanic wife. His children are half Hispanic. He's very immersed in the Hispanic community.
Maybe it was intentional.
So it's a net gain. I don't think it was intentional.
Bait and switch.
It was clearly a mistake.
This is very
He wasn't
clever.
trying to fool anybody.
He should have answered all of the questions about this in Spanish.
Now, what would
He
happen?
should have apologized.
What would happen if Hillary Clinton checked the Hispanic box?
May have had different motivations. We'd have to assess it differently. She doesn't have the
Maybe
connections
she
that he does.
has when the emails
Maybe
are
she has. Maybe the email
Hillary
will
Clinton
reveal.
has a different relationship with the truth, so it might be perceived differently for her.
Jacobus getting in there right
We're gonna-
Notice one name we didn't say during this whole conversation.
What?
Chris Christie. Interesting, huh? Early on, no mention of the governor from New Jersey.
Guys, thanks so much.
Thanks.
Great
Thank
debate.
you.
Let us know what you think about